Hey again, this is Jerry Roberts, and today we're going to start looking at some of the last things that we're going to discuss in the course. And just the next two lectures are going to be just some general tips about how to function in the country and also in crossing cultures, but also this one specifically is going to be about language acquisition. And if you haven't figured it out by now, I am a strong proponent of language acquisition. I cannot imagine my missionary career if I had not dedicated myself and our family had not dedicated itself to learning the Latvian language. The relationships that were built, the doors that were opened, the opportunities that arose that could not have possibly arisen if we had just kept on functioning as English speakers using a translator, or if we had just kept on barely getting by in the language. It was amazing. The difference in the opportunities, the difference in the accomplishments, if you want to use that terminology, the difference in the relationships was not even, it was so different as not to be comparable. So I am very strongly in favor of language acquisition and feel like it is a vital part of any cross-cultural service opportunity. So let's look at a few tips about language acquisition. Now, we're not going to have the opportunity to actually talk about how to best learn a language. There are other courses that will help you with that. It would be great to take some courses in linguistics. If you have access to training materials in the language of the country you're going to go to, get them. Get on the internet and find what sources might be available. There are very inexpensive sources. There are some even free resources in many of the languages of the world. Maybe not all, but many of the languages of the world have resources that can help you start to learn the language even before you go, and I would advise to do that every chance that you get. So let's talk about some language acquisition tips. First, and I would say within our current cultural climate, this is the most important aspect of language acquisition. You are going to have to make a choice to resist continuing to live in America through technology. We have now something that we did not have 20 to 25 years ago. I've told you the stories a little bit, but just to remember, when we went to Latvia in 1997, we had a radio phone in our house that worked sometimes and only if you stood in one window. We had no internet. We had no phone line to the house. But the reason we had a radio phone is the phone line was run to a church that was about half a block away. So we had access to the internet through our Bible school, but that was through a local university. We had about 5 to 8 minutes a day of access, and that wasn't even always dependable. Sometimes we would go on and get kicked off, go on, get tucked off. It might take us 5 tries to get our email sent. Therefore, we were in Latvia. And we were fully in Latvia, and there was no option except to be in Latvia. There was no alternative except to be in Latvia. We didn't have a international television to watch U.S. news. There was no online news, and if there was, we didn't have a phone line. So you see what I'm saying? We set up a call to talk to our families once a week, and we would set up a time that was good for our schedule and their schedule, and a time we thought the phone would work. So I'm not telling you that to say, oh, poor me, poor me. I'm telling you that to say, we did not have this distraction. We did not have this temptation to keep living in America. We didn't have that option. And there are places in the world you still wouldn't, but many places in the world, because of these things right here, because of the cell phone and 4G, 5G, whatever G you get up to on this, because of these, that temptation to live back in America is going to be incredibly strong. And I am telling you, and I can say I am prophesying, if you continue to spend 2, 3, 4 hours a day on this device and continue to live in America through it, you will not enculturate. There's no point in even trying to argue it. And luckily, you can't. If you want to argue it, send me an email. But don't bother. I can tell you, you cannot enculturate while still continuing to live in America through social media, Twitter, Instagram, Skype, whatever else you're using. You will not enculturate. So you're going to have to choose to be self-disciplined. Choose to not allow the access you have to technology to become a bondage and a barrier that keeps you from adjusting culturally. Language acquisition is hard. It is hard. You say, well, I did great in high school Spanish. Well, guess what? You still can barely order off a menu, too. You didn't learn a language in high school. And if you did, wow, that's awesome. You must have had an amazing language teacher. But high school Spanish, high school French, even college level studies is not the same thing as having to learn a language. How would you make a phone call and say, someone is breaking into my house and my wife, she is stuck in the corner? Can you say those words right now in another language? Probably not. It took me a year to learn how to say them in Latvian in a way that would be understandable. Language acquisition is hard. It is not an easy process, and it would be so easy to escape back into something that lets your brain rest, to escape back into watching cat videos, or escape back in with chatting with friends, or escape back into whatever podcast you like to listen to, or whatever silly thing you like to watch. It would be so easy to just escape back into that lets your brain kind of rest. And because it's so easy to do that, you must resist it. Language acquisition requires a slow transformation of your mental pathways. Why is language acquisition so hard? The reason language acquisition is so hard is that you are literally having to retask mental pathways. Those little, you've seen the little pictures of a brain, you've seen brain activity before. You are literally having to reprogram those and actually grow new ones, if I understand correctly. They say that when you're learning a language or learning something really difficult, you are growing new mental pathways in your brain. And that doesn't happen with the snap of a finger. That happens slowly and progressively and little by little, and it's a very challenging thing. It only happens progressively. So you can't just do 30 minutes of study in a day and then go watch cat videos and think you've learned anything. It takes hours and hours and hours and hours, and it takes literally thousands of hours. I have and actually right over there, I could pull them out if I had the time to do so. I have our language study notebooks that we used. And I would advise this as well. Write things down. It depends on what kind of learner you are. If you're an auditory learner, record things. If you're anything tactile at all, write them down. Writing them down is still going to be necessary because you got to write and rewrite and rewrite to get it stuck in your head. The language acquisition folders and notebooks that we have are hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of pages, encompassing, I would easily say, 10,000 hours of writing verb tenses and writing sentences and writing the sentence present tense, writing the sentence past tense, writing the sentence future tense, writing the sentence as though I'm saying it to you, as though you're saying it to me, as though I'm saying it to a child, as though I'm saying it to a person older than me, as though I'm saying it, and it's on and on and on and on. And as I said, if you spend 3 hours a day learning language, you'll learn it. If you spend 30 minutes a day in language and 3 hours a day on the internet, you won't. If you spend 3 hours a day out amongst the people of your country and culture, you're going to enculturate. If you spend 30 minutes a day with the people and 3 hours on the internet, you won't enculturate. So just consider this almost a prophetic warning. Hear it. Don't forget this, that language acquisition is hard. Language acquisition is a slow transformation. And the only way to do it is to commit yourself to it, and don't allow yourself to continue living in America through technology. This is another little kind of little side note, but it has, I think it fits very well with the language acquisition. One of the other textbook that was an optional textbook for the course by Marge Jones talks about the language diseases. And by the way, you don't have to remember these. I'm not going to ask you on a test to define monolingual myopia. So don't worry about trying to learn these words. They're just cool little descriptions of what these things are. But the language diseases is monolingual myopia. My myopia is nearsightedness. Monolingual myopia is the nearsightedness that we have when we can't understand the people around us. You've been in this situation before, even if you've just been around it and been in a cross-cultural situation in your own hometown. Maybe you're in a store and there's a group of people who are Hispanic origin, speaking Spanish, some version of Spanish, and you hear them speaking and you can't understand them, so your tendency is just to turn and not pay any attention to them. Don't look at them, don't turn toward them, don't try to listen carefully to what they're saying or whatever else. There is a tendency when we don't understand people around us to not see them, to almost behave as though they are not there, to almost behave as though, well, I can't talk to them, so I'm going to just keep my distance from them. I can't talk from them, so I don't really see them. And that's a tendency, monolingual myopia. It has sometimes some very embarrassing potential consequences. I still remember very well that there was a time that a pastor was visiting our Bible Institute, and this is a pastor that had been invited by another organization there in Latvia, and one of our organizations that we worked with there, but we didn't work for them, they didn't work for us, we just cooperated with them. And they had invited this American pastor, and while they were there, they were kind of giving them a tour of the country and a tour of all the ministries going on, and brought them to our Bible Institute to let them see what was going on there. And this was a stereotypical ugly American who was very prideful about America, very prideful about how amazing everything we do is and how everybody else is weak and terrible and needs our help and all this kind of stuff. And he walked into our office, and while he was talking to his worker, the national worker he was working with, he was talking back and forth to them, and he looked over at Yeva, and Yeva was our receptionist and also one of our translators. But he looked over at her and he said, "Well, these people don't really have much. They don't have very nice clothing, do they? They really don't look like they can take care of themselves very well." And then he went on talking and carrying on with his person. They walked back out of the office, and when he said that, you know how you've ever had just the blood rush away from your face and you feel almost like this feeling like you're sick. Because what he didn't know is the girl he had just looked at and talked to spoke 4 languages. One of them happened to be English. And so he assumed, because he'd just been in the classroom, and most people in the classroom didn't speak English, they were having to use a translator there, and he assumed that this other person who was dressed the way that the other people were dressed and sitting there as another worker and such, he assumed that this person was not somebody he could understand, so he assumed that she was invisible, that she was just a desk, she was just something to be seen, but he wasn't really seeing her. And so he wasn't invited back to our school. I would never have invited him back to our school for any purpose. And he deeply offended Yeva, and Yeva then told the director of the other ministry what the guy had said, and it hurt the relationship with him and that group later on, because he had monolingual myopia. He didn't see her as a person. And so be aware that until you learn the language, you're going to have to really focus to make sure, don't shut down, don't shut in, and separate yourself from the people because you can't understand them. Make sure you stay open to this, but boy, once you learn the language, it's kind of an interesting thing. This is just something just came to mind, but It was always so funny that we would study a new word in our studies on a Wednesday. And then we would study Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then we'd go to church on Sunday. And all of a sudden, it seemed like everybody around us was using that word. I mean, we learned the word for bird. The word for bird is putnich, which is a hilarious word, putnich. And we did, as far as we were concerned, we'd never heard that word before. And then literally that Sunday, the pastor's preaching from that passage where Jesus talks about the birds, and not one bird falls from the sky, and God sees the birds, and one bird falls from the sky without God knowing about it. Everything is about the birds. I'm going, I never heard that word before. And all of a sudden you start hearing it, and you start becoming aware of the language and aware of the people who are speaking it. So learn the language to avoid monolingual myopia. The second one is another one, lathophobic aphasia. Don't have to pronounce it, don't have to write it down on a test, it's just a cool word. Lathophobic aphasia is the fear of making mistakes. Now, this fear of making mistakes is more universal than just with language. It covers a lot of different areas. It covers a lot, and then it actually, a version of this is what we call test anxiety. Test anxiety is the inability to answer for the fear of being wrong. And so that lathophobic aphasia also affects that. But when it comes to language, it is the fear of making mistakes and refusing to speak out loud because you're afraid you're going to make a mistake. Let me just help you here. You will. You will make mistakes. You'll make lots of mistakes. You'll make thousands of mistakes. You'll never stop making mistakes. For Pete's sake, you make mistakes speaking in English. And if you don't, that's awesome for you. I do. I say the wrong word. I use the wrong word. I start a sentence and change sentences halfway through. You're going to make mistakes, but you can't possibly learn a language without speaking it. You must speak it out loud. Find people you feel safe around. Find friends who know you're learning, who will help you. They'll still laugh at you, by the way. Get over that. They're still going to laugh at you. But speak it. You got to speak the language. You can't be afraid of making a mistake. You've got to say the things. I was able to preach in Latvian after only a year of study. My wife, it took her over 2 years before she was able to speak in front of people. But part of it's because I love to talk. And if you've watched my videos, you know I love to talk. I'm sitting here talking to a computer for 20 minutes at a time. But I love to talk. And so I just talked. And I made all kind of stupid mistakes, but I talked and talked and talked and talked and talked. And I got better at talking. My wife was more hesitant. She didn't want to get in front of people. Now, she still talked to people. She talked to people at the school, talked to people on the, people that were safe zone. But it took her longer to get willing to stand up in front of a group of people and just say, "Hi, I'm an American. I'm going to speak Latvian to you. Ha ha, listen to me speak Latvian." And have the people laugh at you when you make a stupid mistake. You got to speak it in order to learn it. The last one would be interpreter separation syndrome. Interpreter separation syndrome comes when you start your ministry and become very, very dependent on an interpreter. You get there and you start doing things, and you start doing things with an interpreter, and you get used to having the interpreter there, and you get used to having them translate sermons for you, and you translate back to people, and you start taking a translator with you all the places you go and all this kind of stuff. Man, just don't do it. From day one, get along without an interpreter as much as you can. If all you know is the word for cheese and bread, go to the store and ask for cheese and bread, or find cheese and bread and take it home by yourself. Just don't become dependent on it, because there are people who never, ever, ever really get free of their translator, never get free of that interpreter that's always got to be there beside them. And as I said, your first month or so, or your first 6 months, if you're asked to speak somewhere, you're going to have to use a translator. Maybe even your first year, you're going to have to use a translator or an interpreter. That's just a reality of it. But as quickly as you can, start doing without it. And it'll make a huge difference in your long-term language acquisition. So anyway, hope this has been helpful to you, and look forward to our next lecture together.